The diner was only half full when the boy sat down on the floor. Nadia saw him from across the room, a small figure in a good coat that cost more than her last 2 paychecks combined. And she watched him tuck one knee up and begin working at his own shoelace with the serious concentration of someone diffusing something. The lace had come entirely undone, the kind of knot that unravels all at once and leaves nothing behind. He looked at it. He looked at both his hands. He tried looping the lace once, and then tried again, and the loop slipped. And he sat very still for a moment, in the way that children do when they have decided not to cry about something. Nadia set her coffee pot on the edge of the counter, crossed the floor, and crouched down beside him. "May I?" she asked, and he nodded without speaking, watching her fingers move through the 2-loop knot with the kind of attention he might have given a magic trick. She finished it, tugged both ends snug, and sat back on her heels. He studied her face. "Can you be my mommy?" he asked. The question was not asking for anything dramatic. It was the same tone he might have used to ask for more ketchup. He was 6 years old, maybe, with dark eyes and a small, careful mouth. And he was asking because it seemed to him like a reasonable thing to inquire about. Nadia felt the words land somewhere she was not expecting. She kept her face steady. "You should find your dad," she said gently. "He's probably looking for you." The boy nodded again, still watching her. And then he stood up and walked back toward the front of the diner, where a man was rising from a booth with his phone in his hand, and a kind of focused attention in his posture that she registered before she registered anything else about him. He was not loud about it. He scanned the room, found the boy, and crossed the floor with 3 quiet steps, one hand going briefly to the boy's shoulder. His eyes came to her once, direct and brief. The way a man looks when he is cataloging something he has not yet decided what to do about. She went back to the coffee pot. She did not know then that she had just stepped inside the edge of something she had not been looking for and could not walk back out of. She did not know that later she would be grateful for every inch of it. Nadia had been waiting tables at Hernandez's for 2 years and 4 months. Long enough to know every creak in the floor, every table that wobbled if you set a plate down wrong, and every regular who would sit in her section, no matter how many open tables there were elsewhere. The diner was 2 blocks off the avenue in a neighborhood that was becoming something it had not been, which meant the rents were climbing and the clientele was splitting down the middle between the people who had always eaten there and the people discovering it for the first time and tipping like they had invented it. Nadia was good at her job. She read a room in 3 seconds flat from the long habit of needing to, and she remembered orders without writing them down. And she never spilled anything, and on a good night in tips, she could clear $140 and feel briefly, physically relieved. Her rent was $1,800 a month, and she was 3 weeks overdue. The relief never lasted. She had a younger sister named Delia, who worked double shifts at a laundry 2 miles north and texted in all capital letters because she said life was too short for lowercase. And a brother named Teo, who had borrowed $4,200 2 years ago from a man named Harlan, who was not a bank and did not behave like one, and who had since left the city and left the debt and left Nadia to answer the door. She was not legally responsible for what Teo owed. She had looked that up. The problem was that Harlan did not operate inside the legal framework, and Harlan had her address. She was thinking about this, carrying a tray of water glasses toward the window table, when Celia came out of the back and stopped her in the narrow aisle between the 2 tops. Celia was the floor manager. She had the title because she had been there the longest and because she was precise about the things that could be measured, like table turn time and order accuracy, and comfortable about the things that could not be measured, like the weight her words carried when she aimed them correctly. Reyes, Celia said. You went off section to crouch down with that kid. His shoe was untied. I was 30 seconds. Customers at 4 and 6 were waiting. Table 4 had been there 40 seconds. Nadia said. Table 6 had full water. Celia looked at her with the particular expression she reserved for Nadia specifically, a look that managed to be both tired and contemptuous at the same time. As though Nadia were an argument she had already won and was bored of winning. You think you're charming them, Celia said, her voice dropping just low enough to be deniable at a distance. You're not. Honey, you're a waitress with sauce on her apron who sat down on a public floor. Don't make it a whole thing. Nadia said nothing. She carried the water glasses to the window table, set each one without a sound, smiled at the couple there, and went back to refilling the coffee on table 2. She did not make it a whole thing. She did not know yet who the man in the good coat was. She found out 2 days later. He came back on a Tuesday evening, 40 minutes before the kitchen closed, and he had the boy with him again. He chose a booth at the back of the section and sat Marco, which was the name the boy introduced himself with in a very formal tone while Nadia was writing down their order, across from him. And they ate without much talking. The way 2 people eat when they are used to each other's company and do not feel required to fill the silence. She brought Marco a hot chocolate without being asked, because he had been looking at the couple at the next table who had one. And when she set it in front of him, he looked up at her with an expression of genuine gratitude that was too large for his face. Thank you, he said. You're welcome, Marco. His father looked at her then, not the brief cataloging look she had caught before. Something steadier. He left a $50 tip on a $31 tab, which she discovered after they had already gone, folded under the salt shaker the way someone leaves something they do not want to make into a presentation. She told Delia about the tip that night. Delia texted back, $50 for a hot chocolate. Marry him. Nadia put the phone face down on her mattress and stared at the ceiling and thought about the $1,800 she did not have. And the $4,200 that technically she did not owe, but that Harlan seemed to feel differently about. The man from the booth appeared in her parking lot on Thursday. Nadia knew it was Harlan before he spoke, because he was standing beside her car at 7:45 in the morning in a way that was designed to make leaving for work a negotiation. And he had the thick-necked, patient energy of someone who was very comfortable with a debt being the largest thing in the room. He was not alone. The second man stayed by the lot entrance. You're hard to schedule, Harlan said, as though they had been trying to find a mutually convenient time. I don't have it, Nadia said. She kept her voice flat, the way she kept her face flat in the diner when something went sideways. It's not my debt. Your brother made it your debt when he gave me your address. He smiled, not unkindly, which was worse. I'm patient, Reyes. But my patience has a shape. She was calculating whether she could get back inside the diner door before the second man reached her, and the calculation was not coming out in her favor when the black sedan pulled into the lot. She did not hear it arrive. She only knew it had arrived because Harlan's expression changed first, the way the air changes before weather you cannot see yet. He turned. The sedan was idling at the curb, passenger door aligned with Nadia and Harlan, and then the door opened, and a man stepped out who was not from her parking lot and not from the kind of world that worried about loan sharks with a second man at the entrance. He walked toward them without urgency. He was wearing a dark coat over a white shirt, no tie, and his hands were in his pockets. And he moved through the November air with the specific quality of someone who has never once in his adult life needed to check whether there was room for him. He stopped beside Nadia. Go inside, he said to her quietly. He did not look at her when he said it. She went. She went because the word inside was the only word that made sense at that specific moment. And because the parking lot had reorganized itself around this man in a way she understood from years of reading rooms, but had never personally experienced at this proximity. She stood at the diner window and watched. It was not a long conversation. Harlan was speaking, then not speaking, and the second man by the entrance had stepped back against the wall with his hands visible, which told her something she did not have words for yet. The man in the dark coat said something she could not hear through the glass. Harlan nodded once. Then Harlan walked to his car without the second man. And the second man followed 30 seconds later. And both cars left the lot. And the man in the dark coat came inside. He sat in the booth at the back of the section. He ordered coffee, black, and looked at her with that steady look. "Sit down," he said. She sat across from him, because the shift did not start for another 8 minutes, and because she found she could not do anything else. "I'm Joseph Rodriguez," he said. She knew the name in the way that most people in the city knew it. The way you know certain names without having been told them directly, by the specific weight they carry in other people's voices. "The debt is informal," he said. "No legal structure. The man you just met will not come back." He paused. "Your brother's $4,200 is retired. It's done. You don't owe it." She sat very still. "Why?" she said. "Because Marco asked me to find you." He was watching her the way he had the first night, steady and direct. "He hasn't asked me for anything since his mother died. I'm paying attention." Nadia looked at the table. She looked at her hands. She looked at him. "I can't owe you $4,200, she said. "You don't," he said. "It's retired. There's a difference." She was thinking about what the difference was and whether she believed it. When Celia emerged from the back corridor and spotted them through the pass-through window. The look on Celia's face was the kind of look that required storage to be deployed later. Nadia watched it happen and said nothing. Joseph left. If you find this kind of storytelling keeps you pressing play, there's more where this came from. Now let's go back to where this was heading. Rourke arrived at her apartment that evening at 6:15, precise down to the minute. He had a manila envelope and the manner of a man who had been asked to complete a reasonable errand and intended to do so correctly. He was 40 or so. Compact, with a short beard and a suit that was not as expensive as the one Joseph wore, but still cost more than Nadia's monthly rent. He introduced himself, explained that Mr. Rodriguez had authorized the settlement of 3 weeks' outstanding rent directly to her landlord, that the payment had already cleared, and that she should expect no further contact from Harlan or his associate. He set the envelope on her kitchen counter. Inside, she discovered later, was a typed note with a phone number and 3 words. "Use it freely." "I have a question," she said. "Of course." "Does he do this for everyone Marco talks to?" Rourke considered this with the expression of a man carefully selecting the accurate answer. "No," he said. "He does not." After Rourke left, she sat on the edge of her bed with the phone number in her hand and thought about what it meant to step inside someone's orbit by necessity, and whether necessity and choice were actually different things once you were already inside. She texted Delia the barest outline. Delia texted back, "Nadia, Rodriguez, I have questions, and they are not small." She did not have answers yet. What she had was a paid rent receipt and the specific, unfamiliar sensation of being able to breathe at the full depth of her lungs for the first time in 3 weeks. Marco came back to the diner on Saturday, this time in the late afternoon, and he brought with him a small folded drawing he had made at school, which he presented to Nadia with the same formal gravity with which he had introduced himself. It was a person in a yellow dress standing next to what appeared to be a table, which he explained was her at the diner. And he had included himself in the corner, small and precise, with his shoelace clearly depicted and tied. She put it in her apron pocket and kept it there the rest of the shift. She was carrying his and Joseph's order back to their booth when her elbow clipped the edge of the pass-through and a glass of water went sideways across the tray, wetting the back of her hand and sending a small splash across her sleeve. She set the tray down, blotted her sleeve with a towel, and finished delivering the order without dropping anything. When she straightened up, Joseph was watching her the way he had started watching her when he thought she would not notice, which was a miscalculation on his part, because she noticed everything. "You're all right," he said, and it was not quite a question. "I've been doing this for 2 years," she said. "A little water doesn't change anything." "No," he agreed. "I suppose it doesn't." It was the warmth in his voice that she was not prepared for. It was quieter than anything else about him. Celia came through the floor at 4:30 and stopped 2 tables away, watching Nadia talking with the occupants of the back booth. And the expression on her face had settled into something more specific than what she usually kept there. "Reyes," she said, loud enough for the neighboring tables to catch, "I need you on section 1. You can stop doing your little hostess routine over here." She looked at Joseph once, the brief, estimating look of someone who had not yet registered what she was looking at, and looked back at Nadia. "Unless you've got personal business you want to share with the floor, let's move." Nadia moved. At the end of that shift, Rourke was waiting outside in the sedan, which she had started to recognize by the specific quiet of its engine. He drove her home. On the way, she asked him how long he had worked for Joseph, and he said 11 years, and she asked him whether Marco had always been like this, that specific combination of formal and searching. And Rourke was quiet for a moment before he said, "Before his mother passed, he was loud. He was a very loud child. He's been quiet since." She looked out the window at the city going past. "How long ago?" she asked. 8 months, Rourke said. She thought about the drawing in her apron pocket and said nothing else until they reached her building. The photograph was in the inside breast pocket of Marco's small coat. She found it by accident the following Wednesday, when the coat slipped from the back of his chair and she picked it up to hang it on the hook by the booth. And something slid from the pocket and she caught it before it reached the floor. A photograph, small, the kind printed on matte paper, slightly creased at the corner from being folded and unfolded. A woman with dark hair and Marco's exact eyes, laughing at something outside the frame, one hand raised as though she were about to wave or push the hair from her face. She turned it over. On the back, in a child's uneven letters, someone had helped Marco write, "I keep this so I don't forget." She set the coat on the hook and stood very still with the photograph in both hands, and Marco climbed down from his chair and held out one hand, patient and steady. "That's my mom," he said. "I know," Nadia said. "She looks like you." "She died," Marco said, in the same tone he had used to tell her about the drawing, matter of fact, because he was 6 and had learned that saying the thing out loud was the only way to carry it. "She got sick. My dad says she's still here, but I can't see her part." He took the photograph and put it back in his coat pocket, carefully, both hands. "Can you stay while I draw?" "Yes," she said. "I can stay." Across the table, Joseph, who had been reading something on his phone, was not reading it anymore. He was looking at her with something she had not seen in him before. A controlled, careful unguarding, the way a man looks when something he was holding very tightly has shifted in his hands. She held his gaze for a moment, and then she went to get Marco more cocoa. And by the time she came back, she was able to breathe normally again. She thought about the woman in the photograph for 3 days. She thought about the way Marco had said she got sick, and the way he had said, "I can't see her part," and the way he had presented the photograph for her inspection with the quiet certainty of a child who knows that this object is important and believes the person he is showing it to is trustworthy enough to see it. On Friday evening, after the dinner rush had thinned out, she called the number from the envelope. Joseph answered on the second ring. She said, "I want you to know I'm not trying to be anything to him that he needs to stop expecting." There was a pause. "I know," he said. "I'm saying it because I think it matters." "It does matter," he said. "That's why I know." She set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stood with her hand still on it for a long moment. And what she felt was not certainty, which she had not had in a long time, but something quieter and more durable, the specific warmth of being understood without having to perform the understanding first. He picked her up from the diner the following night. Not Rourke, which was what she had been expecting. Joseph himself at the wheel of the sedan, with Marco asleep in the back seat under a spare coat, because they had been at dinner and Marco had fallen asleep before the drive home, which Joseph said happened reliably at 8:45, regardless of location. She climbed into the front passenger seat and could hear Marco's slow, even breathing from the back. "He asked about you today," Joseph said, pulling out of the lot. "He wanted to know what your name meant." "What did you tell him?" "I told him to ask you." She turned in her seat to look at the back, where Marco's small face was visible at the edge of the coat, lashes down, one hand tucked under his cheek. "Nadia means hope," she said, not loud enough to wake him. Joseph said nothing for a block. Then, "Good word." They drove for a while without talking, and the city moved past the windows in strings of amber and white. And Nadia was aware, with the specific precision of someone who spent most of her time managing the space between herself and other people, that she was not managing any space right now. She was simply in a car with this man and his sleeping son, and the air between them was warm and uncalibrated, and she did not move away from it. When he stopped in front of her building, he did not say anything about what had changed between the parking lot conversation a week and a half ago and now. He did not need to. She got out of the car, and he waited with the engine on until she was inside the lobby door, and she watched the sedan pull away from the vestibule window without turning on the light. It was during these days, the quiet ones that accumulated between Wednesday and the following Thursday, that the first intimacy built itself without announcement. It was 5 beats across 2 evenings, and none of them were large. It was the way she handed him his coffee, and their fingers did not quite avoid contact, and neither of them moved immediately. It was the Tuesday night when Marco had fallen asleep in the back booth, and Joseph had asked her to sit with him while he waited. Just sit, nothing else. And they had talked for 40 minutes about small things, the neighborhood, her sister, what he remembered about learning to read in a language that was not the one his grandmother used at the table. It was the way he said her name when he was making a point, not using it as punctuation, but as a confirmation. Nadia, yes, as though her name being in his mouth was a thing he had decided about. On the second Thursday evening, she had come out of the kitchen with her coat to find him standing in the diner doorway, waiting. And she had stopped when she saw him, and he had looked at her across the empty floor with that steady, unguarded look. And she said, "You're here." "Yes," he said. She crossed the floor. He held the door. His hand went to the small of her back as she passed through, briefly, and she felt it through the wool of her coat and did not flinch, which was not something she could have said 6 weeks ago about anyone's hand at her back. Outside, she stopped on the step. "Joseph," she said. He stopped beside her. "I need you to know I'm not doing this because of the rent or the debt or any of the rest of it." His jaw was very still. He looked at her for a moment with the precision of a man who chooses his words the way he chooses everything, deliberately and without waste. "I know," he said. "I've known for a while." She looked at him. She looked at the line of his jaw and the white collar of his shirt against the dark of his coat, and the specific, careful attention in his face that was reserved. She understood now. For her alone. "Okay," she said. He put one arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his side. And they stood there for a moment on the diner step in the November cold while the city went on making its noise around them. She thought, "I didn't ask for any of this." She thought, "I don't want to give it back." That was the same week the situation with Celia reached its third and final form. It happened on a Friday, which was the diner's heaviest night. And Celia chose it deliberately, or chose it without thinking, which came to the same thing. Joseph had brought 3 men from his organization to dinner, Rourke among them, and they occupied the 2 largest back booths, and Nadia was their server, and the floor was full. She was carrying a full tray when Celia intercepted her near the coffee station in a voice loud enough to carry to the neighboring tables and 2 booths beyond. "Reyes." Celia folded her arms. "I want to be clear with you about something, since you seem to be having trouble reading the room. Whatever arrangement you think you've worked out with the gentleman in the back booth, it doesn't make you anything in this building. You're still a waitress who's been late on her tables twice this week, and you're still the woman who sat down on my floor with a strange child, and I don't care who's leaving you tips." She let the word arrangement sit there in the air between them, where it would be heard. "Clean yourself up a bit, honestly. You look like you're trying." The floor was not exactly quiet. It was the specific quality of a busy room where many people have suddenly become interested in their own plates. Nadia set the tray down on the station counter. She smoothed her apron. She looked at Celia without flinching, which she had been doing for 2 years and 4 months, and was very good at. "I hear you," she said, which was not agreement. She picked the tray back up. She delivered the order to table 8, and on her way back she passed the rear booth where Rourke and the other 2 men from Joseph's organization were seated. And she caught Rourke's expression, which was the expression of a man filing something with precision and intent. Joseph had been in the back booth. He had heard every word. She knew it because, when she came to refill his water, his hand was flat on the table and his jaw was set in the way she had come to understand. Meant that he was holding something very tightly inside a closed fist. "Let it be," she said quietly, and he looked at her. "Nadia." "Let it be," she said again. "I've been handling Celia for 2 years. He was quiet for a moment. "Not anymore," he said. 2 days later, Joseph came to the diner with Marco and Rourke and 2 other men whose names she did not know. And he asked to see the owner, who was a tired man named Frank, who had never, in Nadia's 2 years and 4 months, been asked to come to the floor by anyone who made the room go quiet the way it went quiet now. Frank came to the floor. What happened between Frank and Joseph at the back booth took 11 minutes. Nadia was on the other side of the diner and could not hear it. What she could see was Frank's expression changing across those 11 minutes from habitual patience to a specific kind of attentive gravity. At the end of it, Joseph came to find her where she was standing at the coffee station and said quietly, "Teo's debt is cleared. Every cent documented and done. Frank is being made aware of your actual performance record, which is excellent. and certain other things about how this floor has been managed. She looked at him. You cleared Teo's debt already the first time. I cleared the collector's claim. I'm clearing the record. His voice was even and deliberate. There's a difference. She felt the particular burn behind her eyes that she had trained herself not to give in to, because it had never been safe to. And she looked at the coffee pot in her hand and set it down carefully. You've been taking care of all of this, she said. Yes. Since before I asked you to? Yes. She thought about the $50 tip under the salt shaker. She thought about Rourke at her door with the envelope. She thought about the name he had said that first morning in the diner, what it cost to retire a debt, and what it cost to document an employment record, and what it said about a person that he had done both of these things without asking to be thanked. Celia was called to Frank's office. She came out 12 minutes later and did not make eye contact with anyone. Nadia pressed the heels of both hands against the counter and breathed. It was Rourke who told her later, standing by the sedan in the early afternoon, while Marco was inside at the booth drawing, that what Joseph had done was not standard procedure for the organization. He's done many things quietly, Rourke said, with the careful phrasing of a man who was choosing accuracy over discretion. He doesn't do them publicly. He is doing this one publicly. She understood what that meant. She was still understanding it, piece by piece, when Dmitri moved. She did not know who Dmitri was when it happened, which was the point. He was not the kind of person who introduced himself first. It was a Wednesday, her day off, and she was walking back from the laundry 2 blocks from her building with a bag over her shoulder, when a car pulled to the curb and 2 men got out faster than was right. And the third one stayed at the wheel. And then her hands were behind her back, and there was a zip tie clicking tight, and she was in the back seat before she had finished the thought that she needed to fight. The car moved. She did not waste time on fear that had nowhere to go. She used the next 90 seconds to breathe through her nose and take inventory. Her hands were behind her, tied at the wrists. The zip tie was a narrow standard one, which meant it was not made for someone who used their shoulders correctly. The door beside her was not child-locked. She could see the interior handle. The man in the back seat with her was looking at his phone, which told her something about how he ranked her as a threat. She thought about Marco's drawing in her apron pocket, which was not her apron now, which was on the hook by the booth at the diner. But the drawing was clear in her mind, and she thought about his small, careful writing. I keep this so I don't forget. She thought, not today. She rotated her left shoulder forward and down, driving the zip tie against the angle of her left hip, hard, the way she had once watched a video about this at 2 in the morning during a bad week, and had half filed it in the part of her brain reserved for things she hoped she would never need. The plastic caught, held, and then on the second rotation, with her full body weight driving through the motion, it snapped. Her hands came free. She hit the car horn with the flat of her palm, hard, 3 times. And then the man beside her was no longer looking at his phone. What happened next was fast and was not clean, and Nadia was not the reason it resolved. But she was not entirely wrong about being the reason it resolved faster than it would have otherwise. Rourke's team found the car 4 blocks from where it had turned off the avenue, because Rourke's team had been 3 cars back for the last 40 minutes, following Nadia's phone, which was an arrangement that Joseph had put in place after Dimitri's name had surfaced in his organization's intelligence, and which he had not told her about for reasons she could understand now, and would be somewhat pointed with him about later. The car stopped. The man at the wheel stopped. Rourke opened her door. She stepped out onto the pavement with both wrists reddened and her shoulder aching and her bag, improbably, still over her shoulder, because she had not let go of it during any of it. "You broke the tie," Rourke said. He looked at her wrists. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "He's going to say he should have told you about the surveillance." "He should have." "Yes," Rourke agreed. "He should have." Joseph was already at her building when they arrived. He was standing in the lobby, not pacing, but standing with his hands in his coat pockets and the specific physical quality of a man who has been very still for a long time. Because stillness was the only thing keeping him from something he did not want to do in a lobby. When she came through the door, he crossed the marble floor in 4 steps, and his hands went to her face, very gently, and he looked at her for a long moment, without speaking. She let him. "I should have told you," he said. "Yes," she said. "You should have." He looked at her wrists, his jaw set in a way she had not seen before, and she understood. This was what the men who worked for him saw when they had done something wrong, this specific absolute stillness. Except that when he looked back at her face, his eyes were open in a way they never were with anyone else. "Dimitri Vassin will not be a concern after tonight," he said. His voice was even and quiet and irrevocably certain. "Not for you. Not for anyone in this family." She looked at him. "Is that what we are?" she said. "A family." The question cost her something to ask. He looked at her with everything he kept contained most of the time, and he said, "If you'll have us." She thought about Marco's drawing. She thought about the photograph with "I keep this so I don't forget" on the back. She thought about a small boy sitting on a diner floor who had asked her the most direct question anyone had ever asked her, in the truest possible tone. "Yes," she said. "I'll have you." What Rourke had called a concern was retired by the following morning through methods that Joseph did not describe to her and she did not ask about, which was a tacit arrangement they had reached during the drive to his building, where she slept in the spare room with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the city lit outside, and where Marco was already asleep down the hall, and where there was, in the kitchen, a refrigerator stocked with the specific things she ate, which she had not mentioned to anyone. She asked about the refrigerator in the morning. "Rourke," Joseph said. "Rourke watches what I order at the diner? Rourke is thorough." She looked at the contents of the refrigerator, which included the specific brand of yogurt she always ordered with her shift meal, and the particular kind of orange juice she had mentioned to Marco once in passing. And she felt the specific texture of being known not dramatically, but in small particular ways, which was the texture she had been most missing without having named it. She poured herself a glass of the orange juice. "I have some opinions," she told him, "about the surveillance situation." "I know," he said. "I'm going to express them." "I expected that," he said, and the smallest pull of warmth appeared at the corner of his mouth. And she thought that this was probably what it looked like when he was pleased, and that she intended to know it better. She expressed her opinions. He listened to all of them. The rooftop terrace of the restaurant Joseph owned 3 blocks from the diner had been, until the 3rd week of December, a place she had not known existed. She knew it now because of Marco, who had discovered it on a Thursday afternoon and declared it the correct place for the holiday lights, and who had made a sustained case for this position across 2 days with the focused persistence of a child who has identified the right answer and sees no reason to accept a different one. The lights were strung along the terrace railing, and the high posts at the corners, amber and white, and the city lay below them in all directions. Every building in the midtown skyline edged in the particular clarity of a cold December night. Nadia stood at the railing with her coat buttoned and her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that Rourke had produced from somewhere inside with the efficiency of a man who treated a rooftop gathering as a logistical operation and intended to execute it correctly. Marco was beside her, his small gloved hand inside hers, pointing out the buildings he knew by name, which was most of them, because Joseph had taught him to read a skyline the way other parents taught children to read streets. Delia arrived at 7:15, having taken the elevator with deep suspicion, which she mentioned twice. She was wearing her good coat and her expression of a woman who had read every text Nadia had sent over the last 6 weeks and had formed a great many opinions about all of them, and was now rendering a verdict in real time. She stopped when she came through the terrace door. She looked at the lights. She looked at Marco. She looked at Joseph, who was across the terrace talking quietly with 2 of his men, and who registered her arrival and came over with the specific, unhurried ease of a man crossing a room to meet someone who matters. He offered his hand. Delia shook it. She said, "She doesn't ask for help." "I know," Joseph said. "She tied that kid's shoe because that's just what she does." "I know that too." Delia looked at him for a long moment and then looked at Nadia, and something in her expression settled. Not into ease exactly, but into the specific form of relief that looks like setting something down. Rourke materialized at Delia's elbow with a coffee cup, with the timing of a man who had assessed the moment and decided hot coffee was the correct logistical response. Delia looked at him. "You're the one who filled her refrigerator," Delia said. "I organized the logistics," Rourke said. "I have questions about the level of detail involved in those logistics." Rourke considered this. "They're reasonable questions," he said. Nadia left them to it. She walked to the railing and stood beside Joseph, who had come to stand there a moment before, as though he had known that was where she was going. The city below them was lit in every direction. Long strings of white light along the avenue, the buildings dressed for the season, the streets crowded with the particular buoyancy of December. She could see the block where the diner was. 2 blocks over, its small sign unlit at this hour. Marco tugged her hand. She looked down. "Can we come back tomorrow night?" he asked. "We can come back whenever you want," she said. He thought about this, testing the weight of it. "Every night?" he said. "Most nights," she said. "The really good ones." He accepted this the way he accepted most things she told him, as a sound answer to a reasonable question. He turned back to the skyline, one hand in hers and one in his father's, and he began pointing out the buildings again in his deliberate, careful way, naming them one by one. Joseph's hand was warm through his coat sleeve where it rested against hers at the railing. Below them, the city kept its noise, its cold, its motion, its people going in every direction. The lights on the terrace railing were amber and white and steady, and Marco's voice was small and certain in the December air, naming what he could see, and what he could see was considerable. The photograph was still in his coat pocket. She knew it was there. She was glad it was there.